Hi, web viewers. I'm David DiCerto.
And I'm Steven Greydanus. Welcome to a special web-exclusive discussion on Man of Steel. You know, David, this movie has been marketed very aggressively by the producers to the Christian community. There have been sermon plans and special packages made for clergy, special screenings for clergy, special trailers, largely organized around the concept of Superman as a Christ figure. And because of that, we thought it would be a good idea to take a look at some of the moral themes in connection with the film, and in particular, the possibly controversial climax of the film, so viewers should be notified that this is going to be a spoiler-ific discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both agreed that the film was too violent, was too bombastic in its climax, and completely devoid of humor. And though, while we differed a little bit in the overall assessment of it as entertainment, I think we do agree that the act in question was, if nothing else, controversial. You know, the author, Orson Scott Card, who coincidentally was supposed to pen a story for the Superman comics, but was booted after protests over his very vocal opposition to same-sex marriage, you know, once said that sci-fi and fantasies was one of the few remaining arenas for asking really big theological, philosophical, and maybe even moral questions. And I would throw comic books into that area as well.
Well, it's been kind of gratifying to see that there has been some controversy and there has been outcry even in the mainstream media over the rather uncharacteristic way that Superman's battle with General Zod ends. In the climax of the film, Superman has the Kryptonian supervillain in a headlock, and Zod is using his heat vision, and he's potentially going to fry some humans, and Superman apparently can't stop him, and he snaps his neck. Now, there are a number of questions that this act raises. Is this legitimate self-defense or defense of another person's life? Is it treated with appropriate seriousness in the film? And how does it relate to the historical characterization of Superman as a character?
Well, I think there were precedents set. You know, the whole idea of Superman as the big blue Boy Scout, as he's often referred to in the comic books, there's really a tale of two Supermen. From the 1930s with his sort of creation, all the way through the, I'd say, early 1950s, what's known as the golden age of comic books, Superman was much less averse to using violent threats, if not even deadly force, to sort of enforce a harsher brand of justice. It really wasn't until the early 1950s onward, what is referred to as the Silver Age, that Superman has become sort of synonymous with this whole idea of impeccable virtue and refusing to ever kill. So, if anything, the character here was really maybe a return to an older idea of Superman.
Well, but even if that's true, I mean, Superman, the embryonic character of Superman as he was depicted in the Golden Age was much less powerful than the Superman that we know today. He wasn't able to fly, for one thing. He just jumped around. So the character has clearly evolved and developed beyond that. I don't know whether he actually killed anyone even in the Golden Age, but starting in the Silver Age, Superman has always been depicted in the comics as having an ironclad moral code against killing. Now, killing is not always morally wrong in Catholic teaching. It can be legitimate in self-defense, in just war, and so forth, but Superman holds himself to a higher standard, and in that respect, he's like a lot of iconic heroes in those days, the Lone Ranger, Batman, and so forth. And in fact, in all of mainstream comic continuity, I can only think of one instance in which he actually killed someone. It was a very controversial story in the 1980s. A lot of people felt that
Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow.
Well, that was actually an imaginary story in which Superman accidentally killed someone, and he was so horrified that he immediately gave up being Superman. And that really, I think, shows how contrary to the character's traditional portrayal this act was.
Several years later, he does kill 3 Kryptonian criminals.
That was the story I was referring to.
Genocidal act. But then again, after that transgression of his code, he goes into a self-imposed exile because he's so has this profound remorse, and that's my problem with the film. It's not so much the action as it is the reaction of Superman. Yes, they do include this sort of anguished cry, which I believe is sincere, but as several critics have pointed out, a few minutes later, he's smooching with Lois Lane and cracking jokes.
In the middle of the rubble where, it looks like thousands of people have died, billions of dollars of damage has been done. Downtown Metropolis is completely devastated. What bothers me about it is not so much that Superman is depicted killing, because I could accept that in a situation in which he had absolutely no other choice, Superman might even kill. What bothers me is the glibness with which it's depicted in the film. It's a very quick thing. We don't see the build up to it. We don't see, as you say, much of an afterthought from it. It feels to me like something that Zack Snyder wanted to do just because Christopher Nolan and all the people at DC said, no, you can't do that. Superman would never kill.
Well, I would almost say that what we're really experiencing here is the Nolanization of the DC universe.
Although Christopher Nolan was against it.
Yeah, but he's established such a gritty world with his Dark Knight trilogy that I think the specter of the Dark Knight is hovering over even Metropolis. Another main problem I have here is just the laziness of the screenwriting. Even if they had set it up, as you said, where it really put Superman in such a corner that there was no other option, you could somehow go with that. But here I didn't feel that. I actually went to check the novelization of the movie, and at least in the book, they make some attempt, a rather lame one, to explain that the position he was holding General Zod in didn't allow him to take off into flight. So at least they were trying to address that. But the film, I think the real moral quandary here can be traced back to just lazy screenwriting.
So many of the big action blockbusters lately, Star Trek and Iron Man 3, to mention just two, have been so grim and downbeat and with such epic destruction. Even though I knew as soon as I saw Superman's muted colors of his new costume that this was not going to be the bright, optimistic Superman of the Christopher Reeve era. I was hoping for something more in the way of hope, particularly since they're working this Christological motif. I could maybe have accepted the killing of Zod as a grim, almost despairing, downbeat kind of an ending. And yet, in the end, I'm not sure that it feels that way in the movie. At the theater where you and I saw it, there was cheering when Superman broke Zod's neck. And I'm afraid that many people in the theaters, if not necessarily other cultural commentators, are responding to this as a kind of that's cool, Superman totally killed that guy. And I find that as depressing as the ending of the film.
And as an excellent editorial in Entertainment Weekly noted, what's even more troubling about the way the act unfolds in this film is it's an origin movie, which, to use that article's words, Superman is baptized by bloodshed.
Yeah, it's not like we've established Superman as having this reverence for life, which is really, in many ways, I think, undermined by other elements in the film, like we talked about on the show, Jonathan Kent telling young Clark that maybe he should have let his fellow classmates drown rather than risk revealing himself by saving them. So to me, it's kind of the culmination of this inadequate reverence for life that runs through the film. Not to say that there's no reverence for life in the film, but I think that it is inadequate. There are rumors that there is already a sequel in the works, that it's going to come out very quickly. One thing that I'm going to be looking for in the sequel is whether the hints from the screenwriter Goyer and Snyder that perhaps this event will be used as a basis for giving Superman an ethic of never killing in the future, whether that will be something that actually materializes in the next film or whether that was only something they said in response to criticism.
Well, some of the best writing coming out of comic books in recent decades, whether it is Alan Moore, Frank Miller, even Grant Morrison, has really put superheroes in these moral dilemmas and tried to inhabit these two-dimensional comic book panels with three-dimensional characters. So hopefully that will translate into the films as well. If you look back over the history of heroes, particularly even perhaps the most quintessential Christian hero, King Arthur, these have always been paragons of virtue, though they have sometimes committed some atrocious acts. But I agree with you that Superman is a little different. Superman's ultimate power isn't his super strength or his X-ray vision. It's his goodness. And I see perhaps some of the negative pushback to this decision in the film as maybe a hopeful sign. Maybe audiences are still hardwired into believing that there are some characters that are still, driven by virtue and ideals. As Superman says in the movie, that the Kryptonian symbol on his chest isn't an S, that it represents his planet's symbol for hope and the capacity in each person for goodness. So hopefully that's another element that'll come to the fore in any subsequent films.
Will Jor-El's promise that Superman will hold up an ideal for mankind to aspire to? I guess time will tell.